gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. Send lawyers, guns, and money.
We started out with step 1, looking at your personality, and we looked at this very quote at the beginning. Ethics for the Real World by Howard and Corver. With an ethical code in hand, we prime ourselves for dealing with difficult and daily challenges. Without a code, we find it easier to overlook, sweep aside, put behind us, and let go of ethical mistakes. So let's take a look at where we've gone. Again, we started out by refining our core ethical principles. Through step 1, we did a personality inventory, either the Enneagram personality inventory or the ethical lens inventory, depending on which class you're in. Then we reflected on what that inventory said about us, whether we agreed or disagreed, whether it surprised us, whether other people thought about it, that type of thing. We moved on to step 2 by identifying our goals and traits, the things that you wanted to achieve by the time you retired, the traits or characteristics that would help you achieve those, and the traits or characteristics that might hamper you from achieving those. We then went on to step 3, norms and beliefs. Those things we believed absolutely always to be right, and those things we believed absolutely always to be wrong, and why. From there on, we went to step 4, where we audited our day from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. We didn't do anything else with that, but we did take a look at that day afterwards. In step 5, we looked at our key values and exceptions. We looked at over 300 values and identified 10 of those that were the most important to us and ranked their importance, and the 10 that were the least important. And then we looked at exceptions, starting with lying and deception, stealing and harming, and determined if there were any exceptions to that as far as our own values were concerned. From there we went to step 6 and wrote our own obituary. What do you want your life to say about you at the end? What would you like to have accomplished? What would you like for people to think about you, or to know about you, or to remember you? What legacy will you leave? Not only this world, but your own family. In step 7, I asked you to connect and reflect. Go back to the day that you audited. Were you living out your values? Were you working towards those goals that you identified in step 2? Did you see those values come about in your daily activities that you identified in step 5? Did you see exceptions that were not checked in step 5 as well? And what did your obituary tell you about yourself and where you're headed? From the day that you audited to the day that you believe that you would have died, what would you have accomplished? What would you not have accomplished? Are you working towards those goals? So first of all, in drafting the standards, you'll start with the 3 exceptions. The 3 standards of lying, deceiving as one, stealing as another one, and harming as a third one. You have to have at least 10 standards. You can have as many categories as you want. It's up to you. I've given you some examples of other college students' personal ethics code to give you an idea. Please do not copy them, but they should give you an idea. So 10 standards or statements to begin with, and those aren't the categories, it's just 10 total. That's your minimum. You can certainly go longer than that. The codes that you see are very long, but just like your personal ethics code and a company's ethics code, for example, Enron's that we looked at, it was 64 pages long. Clearly, nobody read it and nobody was following it. So only you can determine how long your personal ethics code needs to be. But there's a minimum of 10 different statements, and you can divide that into as many categories as you want, or you can have no categories at all. That's up to you. Then the next step, after you've drafted your standards or statements, is testing the code. And you ask the question, how do we determine if our code is worthwhile? Is it meant to meet the requirements of this assignment, or is it a practical tool that I can use later in life? So how do you go about testing the code? There are 3 ways we do that. First, you check the logic. Will our standards hold up to test for reciprocity and universality? We'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment. Then you check for focus. Have we included too many ethical standards, making the code unmanageable? Again, a 20-page personal ethics code is unlikely to identify the key areas and values that are of importance to you. And then test drive for usefulness. How well do our standards hold up in everyday life? Are they practical? Do we really mean them? So check the logic. Universality means what I want everyone to follow this. Sometimes we come up with a standard or what we think of as a value of our own. It's not something we want other people to follow in terms of us. And reciprocity, Would I want other people applying the same rule to me? And that ties into universality. If the answer is yes in both cases, then the two logic tests hold. If not, you have a problem. Exceptions are allowed when they also fit the two rules of logic. The exceptions are examples of like what you checked in your previous step. Other tests you can look at are the other shoe test, where you look at different people on the receiving end. So if I applied this standard to my girlfriend, or to my spouse, to my child, to an anonymous person, how does that standard hold up? The role model test. Think of the person who you view as a role model. Would that person agree with the standard or statement that you made? The front page test. If you followed this standard or this statement, what would happen if it showed up on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution? Would that be something you would be proud of? Would that be something you'd want on the front page of a newspaper? And of course, my favorite, what would my mama think test? If I actually did this and carried this out, what would my mama think? These tests help us keep the focus on the effects of our ethical decisions on others. Next is check for focus. We need to work with a manageable number. That's why I gave you a minimum of 10. You can have as many as you want. Hundreds of ethical items invade our ethical thinking on a regular basis. Every day you're faced with ethical issues. But you should cut the list to a dozen or two. Look for the unimportant ones, the ones that are least bothersome, that really are pretty far out there and you wouldn't deal with on a daily basis. Unlikely to happen, same thing. Those that are very trivial. And be sure you're cutting what's trivial to you, not to others. Only you know what is important in your life. And then eliminate prudential issues. Prudential issues play an important role in our lives, but they should not be part of our code. For example, I will be an informed citizen. That's really not a standard for your code. It's good that you want to be an informed citizen, but that really doesn't identify a standard or a value. I will have balanced my family and work life. There's really no way to make that into a concrete aspect of your life. That's just something you have to work on. I will treat others with respect. I will not discriminate. I will actively seek out knowledge. Of course, all of these things are good, but they should not be a part of your personal ethics code. This should be just a general thing that's part of your life. And then let's look at the positive versus the negative ethics. Positive ethics tend to respond to unlimited altruistic ambitions and know no bounds. A few are okay. For example, foster truth, return stolen property, help people avoid harm. But you can do the type of thing as I wish to feed the hungry. Well, if you take on that as your goal in life, then that's all you'll ever do, and you'll exhaust yourself and you'll also never achieve it, because you can't feed the hungry all the time. And next you need to test drive for usefulness. Are my standards practical? Do I really mean what I wrote? And don't go for the weak-kneed code. Example, I believe that honesty is the best policy, and I should tell it like it is. At the same time, I cannot adopt a positive ethics to tell the truth. Omission sometimes saves guest and host. Basically, this says I want to tell the truth, but whenever it doesn't work for me, I won't. You really need to be a little bit more specific about when and where you will tell the truth and when and where you might tell a white lie. We also look at usefulness and test it to determine when we fill our codes with positive ethics, like I will feed the hungry, I will always help others. Negative ethics take little or no energy to execute. Positive ethics can easily exhaust us. We need to be somewhere in the middle to have a balance. And we only have a limited supply of positive energy. And the last part of this is refining the code. Clarify degrees of separation. How close is too close for unethical behavior? So if you're not engaging in unethical behavior, but everyone in your company around you is, or all of your friends are, where do you want to draw that line? Do you want to leave that company? Do you want to get rid of this group of friends because they're not a positive influence on you and they might also get you in trouble? Another thing is to draw sharper lines. Can we draw clearer lines for our positive ethics? So instead of saying I will feed the hungry, try to be a little bit more specific. What specifically can you do on a regular basis to address the issue of the hungry? Certainly a laudable goal, but what can you do specifically that won't be something that you can't possibly achieve in your lifetime, but it's manageable that you can achieve in your lifetime and still address this value or this issue that's very important to you? And last, consider hierarchy. If you remember from the very first PowerPoint, we talked about the iRobot example. If two or more ethics conflicts, which one gets priority? An example that they used in the Howard and Korver book was, you say that you will help your friends when in need, but you also say you will never steal. Well, you're in a situation where your friend needs to get to the hospital as soon as possible, you've been waiting for an ambulance and you feel that if you wait any longer, they might be seriously injured or die, do you steal a car to help get your friend to the hospital? That type of thing. It's very extreme, but that's what we're talking about. Consider a hierarchy. And then there are the pitfalls. We've covered most of them. Confusing prudential and ethical issues. An ethical issue regards whether or not you're going to tell the truth to a child about Santa Claus, or about issues like that. A prudential issue is like what we talked about, I will feed the hungry. And using loaded language. An example of this is certain language in our country, and in every other country actually, but if we're using the United States as an example, certain language has taken on a meaning of its own. For example, if you say the word pro-choice, I believe in pro-choice, well, if you take that out of its context of what it means in the United States regarding abortion, everybody believes in pro-choice, meaning the ability to choose for yourself. But pro-choice has become a very specific set of terms, which means you believe in the ability to choose whether or not you can have an abortion, whether or not you support abortion, that type of thing. So try to avoid the pro-choice type language and specifically say what you mean in terms of that issue. Your standards should not judge the actions of others. It should really be about what you believe or don't believe. And your standards you should also not base your ethics on the judgment of others, whether or not other people will have this same standard or not, whether it's your spouse, your significant other, your friend, that type of thing. And as you're growing up, and some of you have been on your own for quite a while, you'll realize that sometimes your ethics are not going to agree with the same as your parents. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right, your parents are wrong, or vice versa. It's just we develop different standards and values as we get older. And I would certainly say that many of my standards and values are different than my parents, but that doesn't mean either of us are right or either of us are wrong. Making praiseworthy but not livable standards. So making these big, broad statements about how you're going to live your life that are really quite impossible for the human being because we're all imperfect. Rather, make your standards simple. Something that you can believe in, something that you can live by, something that you can look at and say, yeah, I know how to live my life this way. Or writing vague standards. Vague standards aren't going to help you. That's really something you put in place to finish the assignment. And this assignment should be something more than just meeting the basic guidelines by the due date. And so then you ask yourself, how do I know if I have a good code? If it describes the very best version of you. If it describes a version of you that, oh yeah, that would be good, but I can't really follow it, but it sounds good on paper, that's really not going to help you. That code's not going to be of any use to you. But if it describes a version of you that you believe that you can follow on a daily basis, and it doesn't mean you can't ever make mistakes, but it keeps you focused on where you want to be, to meet those goals that you identified, to live the life that you hope to see at the end. Lao Tzu, the father of Taoism, had a saying, at the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want.
The way I always do. How was I to know she was with the Russians too? I was gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this. Ha! I'm the innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck between the rock rock and a hard place, and I'm down on my luck. Yes, I'm down on my luck. Well, I'm down on my luck. I'm hiding in Honduras. I'm a desperate man. Send lawyers, guns, and money. This shit has hit the fan. Alright, send lawyers, guns, and money. Huh. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Send lawyers, guns, and money.